You're listening to All Things 3D, where we talk about the world of fabricating, designing, and capturing in the third dimension.
Hi, good afternoon, or at least that's good afternoon in California. If you're joining me, I apologize for being a little late. We ran a little long in our All Things 3D, 3D in Review today. So I'll get right into it. Today I want to talk about a new program that I've been working on. As you're aware of, if you're here, either one of you have actually purchased one of my products, or you've been waiting eagerly to get a hold of BioStep Capture, or you've been working with the beta version. As you're probably aware of, if you've been listening to what I've been talking about lately, or if you've been playing with the actual beta version, there are quite a few little features in it. So I'd like to go over that. So I have a couple of areas, put together some models that I was going to scan, and then I was going to look at a variety of different devices. So I'll have to set up each one. I'm using Apple TV, and I will be able to do that. Now, I also sent an invite out to a select few people who you're welcome to come in if you're joining us, to come in. Make sure that you click on the link that I just sent, which brings you in as a participant instead of a spectator. With that, I'm going to go ahead and continue, assuming that I have an audience. Again, I apologize for being a few minutes late. But first thing I want to bring up is the, and I'll have it right here, is the iPad Air 2, which currently is the best performing unit. Sadly, one of the things that I'm going to add to the application is the ability to identify the charge on the battery on the structure sensor. I don't know why I have not included it yet. However, when I plugged it in today, the battery had been discharged, so I am charging it at the moment. The nice thing is, and you may have already found this out, you can actually continue to use the sensor if you plug it in with this little battery thing. In fact, I've been thinking about creating a dual power adapter to a 5-volt source like this one here, so that I can power the lighting system as well as the iPad mini and the sensor all at the same time. So if you want to do any long duration scanning processes like multiple people or something like that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'll just put it, go through the menu, the user interface on this particular application on the iPad first, and then we'll move on to the iPhone and then the iPod 6th generation. But currently, and the reason I'm a little discombobulated is one of the things that I noticed is that in order, because I only have 2 sensors, in order to calibrate for one of the sensors for the iPod, I had to remove it from the iPad. Now, even though in using the more robust expert calibrator, I did run into, even though I thought it may include the ability to use both sets of parameters, it doesn't appear to be the case. So once I calibrated it for the iPod Touch, now it's out of calibration for my iPad. So I'd have to go back and recalibrate it. And you can see this if you look at the mesh information and where it lines up to, like the skull's an example there, see how it's above it. And there's a reason for that, because with the iPod Touch, since it's a smaller device, I've aligned it in the middle of the case instead of the common more in parallel with the RGB lens. So that's why you're seeing the offset that you do there. However, for our example here, we won't really worry about it as much as doing the color textures. We'll use the iPhone 6 for that. But again, because we have a larger screen with the iPad, I'm able to add more features and give it more space. With the iPhone 6, it was much more confining. That's why I have two different user interfaces for the 2 different type of devices. So I'll start in the upper left-hand corner, and then we'll kind of move around, and it's actually buried. But one of the things that I found very important, especially doing color textures, and that I found out later, is that you can assign how much texture coverage over how many faces. And the default that you're seeing in the SDK and their own occipital scanner app was only the ability to do, I think it's 50,000 faces, or even if actually it was 30,000. So I bumped that up, either leaving it at the default or going to 300. And this will be more apparent when I bring up another device that doesn't have the calibration needed for best results message that comes up. But in this case, I won't be using color here, but it's a switch like others, but again, it's being, yeah, I want to do that, obfuscated by the calibration routine, but it's a switch and you can either select one or the other. 300K obviously will allow you to use more faces, only if you are creating a mesh with that many faces. If it's less than that, it won't work. There we go. The one right next to it is the new feature with the HQ color. If you're a developer, you're already aware of that. Over the last few months, let's see, hopefully I'll have enough. Yeah, I'll leave that in. Over the last few months, they developed a new HQ color system which uses more of the megapixels in the RGB camera, allowing you to, I think, increase 4 times the texture resolution. And again, you can turn that off if you need performance. I found with the iPad Air 2, I'd leave it on HQ, and that is the default. Odd. And then I'll go ahead and I unplug the power supply. Maybe that'll prevent that from occurring. Next to that is the depth only, or the RGBD. Again, that's another feature that came out, I think, in February. This is the new feature that uses the color camera. Again, make sure that you have a calibrated system, otherwise it's not useful for doing the actual depth accurate. And where this actually plays out or provides the best performance is, let's say, a smooth object like a cylinder or something like that, where you don't really have enough distinct texture in the mesh itself to provide the proper mesh alignment. So now with the color functionality, it allows you to recognize key things, let's say, in the objects. And the example they've given is a Coke can. So the actual emblem on the Coke can helps ensure that you have proper tracking. And it does seem to work pretty well. But you have the ability of using one or the other. Sometimes I found that if the object is of one color, I found that it doesn't work that well. And I've gone back to the depth only. Below that, again, going counterclockwise, is the scan button, which is like the SDK version, except I've modified the logo. And then right below that is a new feature called, as I call it, the kind of a spot focus. One of the things that I have found in working over the last months with the beta versions from Occipital is that, as you can see, you might see it's a little blurry here. The reason for that is, if you look down at the bottom, you'll see the focus adjusting constantly as I move from one object to the other. Right before you actually perform the scan, it then goes into a manual lock mode. But I found sometimes the autofocus doesn't accurately lock on what you're really working with. And since this is center weighted, I have created a spot focus that you click on it, it immediately focuses on the object that's within the reticle. And notice I've added a reticle here. And then it locks it and immediately puts it into a manual mode. Now, the cool thing about the manual mode, just like it indicates, I can use a slider to adjust it. And let me get closer to the object so you can see. So as you can see, I can fine tune it. And the sad thing is, because of the various RGB cameras on the iOS devices, there is no clear representation of the value between 0 and 1 to a corresponding metric or even inch scale of how far you're from it. In fact, I actually tried to create a scale and it wasn't linear. So with that being the case, I have left that as a value between 0 and 1, which is somewhat arbitrary. But it's kind of, well, actually, does it? No, I think I represent that with an actual distance now. So I'll go ahead and put it back on auto. And again, if you notice, it's animated, so it fluctuates as you choose different objects. So that's one of the features that I've included as well. And again, you can hit spot focus, lock it into whatever you want to scan, and then it will set it at whatever arbitrary figure that would be, and then move it to the manual mode. So again, going clockwise. Next to that, and this is the important feature, and as some of you as developers may have already seen, you can programmatically modify the size of the voxel. That's one of the variables built in. But I've developed a slider for that, and I have found that I can actually go down to 1.8 millimeter from the default 4 in the apps that they provide, and get very reasonable scan performance, meaning frames per second. Obviously, if you want to do this in real time, the update process should be quicker. Now, I see potential in the future of possibly embedding metal in the SLAM functionality in order to enhance the mesh development, plus optimizing some of the algorithms. So we'll see what's in store for the future. The other thing is we're in another update cycle, so more than likely we're going to see some faster performing iPads, including the newer iPad mini, rumors are, as well as the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus S's, or 6S, 6S Plus. Both of these will also include the ability to, I think with an A9 processor, some say up to 50 to 75% improvement. So that will also help with this voxel size. Obviously, the smaller you make it, the more voxels you can get. Now, there's a caveat behind it, and I'll show you when I start scanning. It seems to introduce more noise. And the way around it, and in talking with Jeff, is that you essentially create more samples, meaning moving around it. And you may have already experienced that in Sconnect and even in the iOS app. Same thing here. You'll see the same thing. So moving on, the other thing that I found very important is the ability to get away from taking your hands off the sides. And if you want to see, I'm actually holding it like this. By the way, this is what I call the NEODiMOUNT bearer essentials. Essentially, it's the 3 neodymium magnets attached directly to the body with some 3M strong adhesive. Before you go, oh, well, I'm not going to do that to my iPad. I have found removing the adhesive is very easy, leaving no marring of the actual surface itself. So I found it quite safe and kind of gives it a nice streamlined attachment feature without having to use the bracket. And so I like that. And then above that is my new NEODiMOUNT, one of the versions that allow me to securely mount the lighting system that I'm going to give an example later on as well. So as you can see, I'm rotating around here, but back to the slide controller. It's a vertical slide controller, and if you're a developer, you're aware that that's not one of the features built into it, but luckily there's a lot of enterprising developers out there, and there was a routine, and I was able to modify it to work with this. And what this allows me to do is go anywhere from 0.1 meter or to 1 meter in cube size. And the advantage of this is the ability to not have to use, in the past, the pinch and zoom, which where you have to remove your hand from the iPad, but you can continue to hold it from the sides and position that cube. The other thing that I have also done that I prefer, because I kind of like the Sconnect model, is more of the what I consider the cube projection, where when you put it near an object, it acts more like a projector. If you've played with the developer, they are using gravity in order to find and change the axis of the cube so that it lays flat on a surface. I particularly don't like that, especially in some of the scanned models that I have to work with, where they're stationary and are front projected. So this works better for me. And it duplicates more of the Sconnect model than the gravity-fed IMU version. So as you can see, by moving the control on the left-hand side, I can increase or decrease the size of that cube. Now, something that I didn't mess with the SDK version of this algorithm is that if you increase the cube, you're also changing the voxels, and I may go back in and modify that. So what I have found, the smaller the cube, the more dense the voxel increase, but which is good because you want to be able to, especially if you're doing faces or smaller objects, to be able to modify that cube. Something else that was in earlier versions, which I may also include, is a 2 times, which is also a feature in Skinnect that allows you to have a taller box. That's better for obviously doing people and things like that. And I'm looking at incorporating that. And as mentioned early on, a battery feature, so I know how much battery I have left on my device before I get started without going to the previous, so that will be built in before it's released as well. So that's about it. So I'm going to go ahead, and as mentioned, I'm not going to do any color because the alignment's off because it's set up right now for the iPod. But I'll go ahead and let's see, move up here, and you should be able to see it. I'll scan the head here on the doll. So I'll scan. Now, as I mentioned, I'm at 1.8, and I'm going to rotate. I'm not going to go all the way around it. And again, this is without, and this is at 7D. Now notice there's a distance measurement in the middle there. I found this very useful, especially with color textures, because it allows you to keep your retina, or excuse me, reticle, on the object, and it senses where you're at so that you can keep the distance of the sensor to the object. And this is very important for textures later on. Okay, so that should be smooth enough. So there you go. And as you can see, there is some surface noise there that will have to be smoothed out later. I may include a smoothing routine, or I'll just leave that to external software. Now, the important thing is to look at the wireframe, and then we'll go back to the default. This is the wireframe view. Notice the triangles now and the compactness. So that is the advantage of a smaller voxel size. So in fact, let me jump to my full screen version here. There we go. So that you can see that. So it's much denser. In fact, I have it set up that I could go to 1, but notice even this AirPad 2 is not fast enough. And I'll get in as close as possible but right now, with the sensor without 4 eyes, that's about 40 centimeters or 0.4 meters. Or 400 millimeters, however you want to choose it. But it's set up right now to read in centimeters, so we're about 45. I'll adjust my cube size, make it more compact. The other thing I noticed, as you adjust the cube size, you're also changing the z-axis as well. And if it's not large enough, you're not going to accompany the entire model, if you notice there. So we'll see if this will be the case here. Okay, notice a lot longer. Notice there's more noise, but the cycling time is going to be slower because essentially at 1 millimeter voxels, you're really pushing the envelope on the processor. So I found that 1.8 to 2.5 millimeter voxel size gives you, in my opinion, pretty good performance. As mentioned, the defaults in the scanner app is at 4 millimeters. So I'll let this scan a little bit longer to smooth it out. And what I have found at the smaller voxel size, you're going to get the performance that you can see in Skinnect, which for some time has been eluding the iOS version. And again, as mentioned, this is all going to improve from the performance perspective without just by either buying a new device or new stuff that comes out in future upgrades. All right, so I'll stop. And then we'll take a look at it. So again, more surface noise. There actually looks to be some artifacts there. But we'll go to the wireframe. And notice now our faces are even smaller now, much denser voxel than previously. So there's the advantage of being able to adjust it. And as mentioned, being a slider, you have the ability. Now that I'm in the mesh view, I've added a few new features that will be available in the app. As mentioned, I am working with a company called BioStep out of LA, where this app will be provided using Parse. And this is mainly to be used to create scans of limbs and other things that an orthopedic group may require. In his case, he creates orthotics, so he'll be able to take the scan that's uploaded to Parse as well as some data from a form-filled application and use that to create the orthotics. There will also be two in-store features called Dropbox and email. As you're already aware of, in the previous version, you do have an email function that'll still be there, as well as a Dropbox. Currently, they're not active. And then finally, something that's useful for him, but if you're wanting to 3D print, you don't need color texture, I will be offering an STL output file as well as the standard OBJ that's included. So those will be available to you as well. And then obviously you just select send once you identify one of those two. Now, when you do a send with the parse, you will require a login ID and a password. So you'll see that login screen when you get to that point. So I'll go back to it, and that's pretty much BioStep Capture. And it's, like I said, it's pretty robust. I'm thinking about turning off creating a feature that some of these features will be put to a default and invisible unless maybe call it a pro feature or something like that. So they will only become available when you need it. So maybe just the slider control and the scan control, and then a pro or advanced button to enable the rest of it. With the iPad, obviously I have more screen real estate, but I wanted to ensure that the area in the middle is still available. So that's about it for the iPad. And for the iPad mini, it's pretty much the same thing except a little smaller. But the important thing, as I've been working on for some time, is the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. And if you have one of those and you're still waiting for the calibration feature, I think that's coming very soon, as mentioned in the email. So look for it. Jeff has reached out for me to provide parameters of the NEODiMOUNT cases so that they can include it in the latest calibration routine. So I hope that will happen sooner than later. So those of you who have bought the iPhone 6 or 6 Plus cases will be able to use it. All right, so now I'm going to put this down and enable the iPhone 6. So give me a moment to switch what device is being used by the Apple TV. So okay, so my camera has gone kind of nuts on me. So let me. There we go. All right, so on to the iPhone 6. As you're probably aware of, I developed a case called the NEODiMOUNT case for both the iPhone 6, 6 Plus, the iPod Touch, which I'll show in a little bit, as well as the iPad mini and the iPad versions of the case. Those are based on a case by another manufacturer that has an included tripod mount. And then I have added the NEODiMOUNT magnetic structure to it so that you can mount it just like this. The advantage of this system is, let me jump to this screen, there we go, is, as mentioned before, it uses magnets. They're intense magnets. There has been some concerns from some people, none of the beta testers that I've spoken to, and I did some thorough evaluation the other day about how does this affect the camera. In my experience over the last 7-8 months, it has not in any way interfered with the camera functionality or the focus. The iPhone 6 Plus has the optical stabilization, and there's been a video of somebody putting a magnet directly on it. I think the magnet that was used was either damaged or not created properly. So it caused some oscillation. Like I said, I did test it thoroughly with the 6 Plus case. No issues. However, to minimize it, these use fairly intense. So what I've done is I've gone with a less intense nearer the body of the camera to even minimize that more. And the reason I chose 3 is to provide some redundancy. The other thing about the NEODiMOUNT case is that it has a support that I'm using actually for a lot of things now to support the hand grip from the grip and shoot, which is a Bluetooth device, and at a later upgrade the code for that will be in the BioStep Capture app, so that you'll be able to use pretty much all the features of enabling your scan, as well as kind of an undo feature or recycle, kind of like what's in the app already, and then a save feature. So without ever having to go back to the screen and touch it. So one of the things I found in using a device like this is that it's kind of like an airbrush. So you have much more flexibility, and it's one-handed, which is more difficult to do with the iPad. Better to do with the iPad mini, but more so it's more flexible with the iPhone or 6 Plus or the iPod Touch. So that's about it. Altogether, it fits firmly. You'll notice in the newer case, I now have a groove here. This sets into the NEODi VR case. You may have seen my demos. This allows you to use this same setup in a goggle system or headset VR system that I've created in conjunction with Homido out of France. I basically changed out their faceplate so you can place this in it, wear this on your head, and be able to interact in a VR world. And you know, if you see my video, you probably saw my emotional reaction. It is cool, I guess, for lack of better words. It's a tremendous experience. You're able to crouch, sit, walk as though you're in that VR environment. And I will have some demos to be released probably in the next month, including one at MedX that I call Surgery, where you actually can be amongst other VR avatars in a surgical environment. So I look forward to making that available soon. So there you go. So let's go ahead and fire it up. And I will turn on AirPlay for this device. It's already mirrored. Okay, and go ahead and fire it up. I actually so this is the version here. Let me modify my screen settings so that you can see the entire screen and not just part of it. So like the previous version, to keep it, I've added basically all the same features. The reticle in the middle, the cube placement. Instead of the left-hand side, I have placed the vertical slider on the right-hand side. So again, you don't have to have two-step operation. It actually works well because you hold your hand with the grip and then use the slider off the top of the right-hand side. Scan button, and again, the spot focus adjustment. And then along the edges, you have all the other features as well. So nothing really has changed. Most of these you can set before scanning so that you don't have to touch the screen again. And again, that'll be very important once I enable the Bluetooth functionality in the grip and shoot. So we'll go up, and since this one is calibrated, we'll be actually able to do the test with the color. So I will jump to the actual screen. So I will disappear, and you'll see me an operation here. So I'm going to use the slider right now to move the cube in. I will modify my voxels. Now, since the 6 is not as fast as the R2, my voxel size, it's a little sensitive, so there we go, to about 2.3. And notice that, again, I have the numeric depth information. And notice if you get too close, it says out of range. And same thing if you get too far back. I may just change that to a color instead of saying, because it seems to be a little bit too disruptive. I'll just turn it to red when you're out of range. But I'll use the minimum, which is 40. Make sure our cube placement is correct. And I'll also modify this to 300K faces. We're on HQ color, and again, the RGBD mode. I will use the spot focus to lock in focus, and then I will scan. So what's kind of nice is I have a table in front of me. Notice there. So I'm actually extending out from my body, and because I can do this with one hand, I have that capability, but obviously not too much. And notice how I'm trying to keep it at 40, and it's actually, or at least for me, I must be uncoordinated, a little difficult to do so. So I'll finish up, and we'll take a look at the mesh. And again, like I said, there is at a lower voxel more surface noise, but the resolution, if you compare it to what you're able to do now, is much better. So now we'll add the color. And I like the Occipital Applying Magic label, so I left that alone. So there you go. Looks like there might be a little deformity in the texture, so we'll have to do that again. And it actually looks a little blurry, so maybe I wasn't completely in focus at the time. So let's try this again. The other thing I have noticed too, and I didn't bring it down with me, is the RGB 4 eyes lens actually makes a difference. So maybe I just won't go across. As far as the crispness of the RGB camera on the Apple device, you wouldn't think so, but for some reason it does. And actually, I think I know why that's an issue. I have found that the algorithm used to capture colors works best if you start out in front. This kind of goes against what I've said in the past, is that if you start off from the side, it seems to capture, but now with the new RGBD and texture mode, it appears if you start out in front, that gives you the best options for texture. So let's see if that holds true. So you may have noticed already in the capture process that shadowing is going to play a big role, and this is one of the reasons I came out. There we go. Still a little bit soft, however, color accuracy is extremely good. But there are some issues with brightness because of the varying lights in this particular room. And as you know, it's somewhat of a studio, so I have lights all over the place. So that's one of the reasons I created the NEODiMOUNT or 4 eyes collar that allows me to use a lighting system, which we'll go ahead and do now. So give me a moment to add the collar. And by the way, if you're not familiar, I think I showed it already, but I'll go back to it. This is the actual collar. This is one of several that I make. It includes two what do you call it? Smaller NEODi magnets that are used to hold the light in place. And this particular version here is a collar only. I have a version of this that also includes the RGB lens system using the new bayonet connector that they have available on the iPad Air 2. But this one works well because you can either position it above or below, and so that way you can determine where you want your lighting. I found this with the iPad mini case or Air. You don't have enough space between that and the, oops. So, hang on a second. So it slips on, that's why I call it a collar, around the bottom of it. I have found, and I'll go ahead and disable it, that if you slip it on above it and then just slide it down to the base, it should fit snugly, and then it'll be ready to go. And I'll show you that here in a second. So I had to unplug it. Let me bring it back in. I also noticed that the BioStep Capture program seems to interfere with the AirPlay. All right, so here you go. There it's attached around the sensor and then placed right below. This is the actually NEODiBRIGHT, which is essentially a 30 LED bar. Currently has a fixed cable, but it will have a micro USB connector in the future so that you can use any cable with it. And then in this case, it has a standard USB, so it will work with any, and I think I'll include a small USB cylinder battery with it, but it'll work with any battery system. I've got this nice high-powered one that I use for my streaming system. It's like, I don't know, 20,000 milliamps, something like that. So I'll go ahead and turn it on and cover your eyes. There you go. So it provides a nice even, it's about 5,500 Kelvin. So it's somewhat more on the, what do you want to call it, the bluer end of this scale. So keep that in mind, that if you have mixed lighting, that could play an important part in how you set it up. I will have a version, well actually this, since it has two magnets, you can actually only put it in place with one, and then you can actually apply another one. So if you want more light, you just buy two of them. So I think the versatility is kind of like a Lego system. I will also create a what I call the NEODi or NEODi, I can't even say it, but essentially it's going to include the light system as well as an audio section so that you can use this for video and camera work. So let's go ahead and go back to my screen and show the difference in using the NEODiBRIGHT light. Man, my ability to talk today is limited, so I apologize for that. So I'll fire it up. So notice right away our ability, our lighting is better. It will include the diffuser. It's built into it so that you get more of a soft box effect instead of the harsh LEDs, but it's still fairly bright. People have complained when you shine it in their eyes. So let's go ahead and scan. So one thing that you noticed or may have is that, and I'll go ahead and decrease, when I completely got out of the application, all my settings went back to 0 or their original default settings. So if you feel that that should be an important feature, email me and I'll make sure that I save it within the directory so that way you don't have to keep resetting it. In fact, I'll probably do it because it's a pain for me. So And one of the reasons I came out with this app is because there are a lot of features that I wanted to see in this that weren't there. So there you go. Notice that the lighting is better. Now keep in mind it doesn't completely fill in all the shadows, otherwise you would essentially have too much light and you'd have some blowout. But it does fill it in, and again, keep in mind it's about a 5500 Kelvin, so I would make sure that the rest of the lighting in your setup or use standard natural light, which is about 6500 to 9000, stays within that parameter, and you won't have as many issues. One thing I might be adding as well is a color temperature setting, so that way it's fixed to the NEODiBRIGHT. But for the most part, the camera does a good job. So there you go. So again, this was at, let's look at the wireframe. And obviously we can get a little denser with the mesh, but it's pretty satisfactory. As mentioned, oh, we lost our connection again. But it does allow you to get more in the range of Sconnect without having a Sconnect, and this will improve as the algorithms improve and some of the new performing phones and iPads come out. This will allow you to actually use the device instead of just as a remote device for the Sconnect software. All right, so I think that's about it. Drop back into color. Hats off for Occipital in creating a much better algorithm for doing color. You know, now we're able to do it all within the app. And as mentioned, there will be multiple output opportunities for you, parse, Dropbox, and email, as well as OBJ and STL when the actual app is released to the App Store. So one other thing before I finish this up, and that is for those of you who have 4 eyes. Now, if you haven't had a chance to work with the beta, you may have already noticed in using the standard scanner app that you don't have the ability to use 4 eyes with it. And one of the reasons for that early on was the limitation of 40 millimeters. So I've really worked with them to give me a closer distance. I think we're at 250 millimeters. The lens system, current lens system, its sweet spot is around 300 millimeters. It extends out to about 375. Like a close-up lens, though, that is about the extent of its range. So it's specifically to be used for close-up functionality. I found that it works really well for faces and I would say small objects, but fairly small objects, more importantly to capture detail. And the reason I say not small objects is because you're still going to have the same issue that you have with the standard sensor, in that you're not actually increasing its resolution, you're just increasing its ability to get closer to it. So you're still limited from that perspective. So let's go back and scan, and notice we're now at 30, like I mentioned. That same object, and we can actually make our cube a little smaller. And I also found, let's do this, that you need to kind of lock yourself in to around 30. If you move even a few centimeters, the focus at this closer range actually, as you move around the object, can cause it to soften a little bit. Okay. So notice the mesh actually seems smoother, less noise now, and we have more detail in the eye, which you didn't have in the previous version. And then we're going to apply color. And as I said, with the RGB lens, it actually seems to provide, even without the standard lens, more sharpness. And like I said, I don't have that here to show you, but if you've seen some of the scans I have on my Sketchpad page, you'll know, understand what I'm talking about. So one of the things that I found is that even though I really like the ITSY's 3D application because of its ability to capture texture, and yes, the RGB lens seems to sharpen that as well, I've asked them to increase the number of faces or voxels because I found when you port 50,000 out to, and I'll actually show you some examples here in a moment, out to, let's say, shapeways for their color capability, I found that anything less than 300,000 voxels doesn't give you that detail that you need, let's say in facial structures like the nose and around the eyes. And again, I'll go back to the wireframe so you can see. Notice how we're able to actually capture some of the curves. That's something that can't be done at 50,000, which you can now with the iOS application, as well as with Sconnect, as you may be familiar with. But as far as I know, currently Sconnect does not have the color capabilities. And here I'll scan the skull. Now I'm looking right into the light here, so hopefully. So let's get at 30. Okay, lock our focus. I also found that different materials provide better scan. I found that the human skin tissue seems to work really well, and if you've tried to scan your dog or animal, if you notice, I did that. The fur actually diffuses it, so it kind of looks. You don't seem to see the density of the fur itself in the mesh. So again, here you go. Notice again, you're getting more detail, like in the teeth and so forth. We add the color to it. And something, if you've been playing with the new SDK, yes, the performance and the color textures, I think, is almost double. I've noticed that I'm able to actually scan a lot faster now and apply textures than previous versions. So again, hats off for Occipital for really pushing the SDK. Okay, so I think that's about it. We've covered two different models, the iPad as well as the iPhone, and applied the NEODiBRIGHT as well as the 4-Eyes lens system, and you've seen for yourself how that works, and as well as gone through all the settings on the BioStep Capture. As mentioned, I put it in there kind of to create kind of the Swiss Army knife. I will probably create like an advanced button so that a lot of those features aren't available unless you need them, so it doesn't clutter up the interface there. I personally like the reticle and the projected cube versus using the IMU, so that's why I left it that way. It does really, really well for faces and anatomical areas. One of the things that I'm going to be promoting this for is working with the Shriners group so that we can scan burn victims accurately without having to move them. And obviously a product like this and its ability to be very mobile, I think is going to be important because you can get and scan within the crevices and around an object that's much more difficult to do with an iPad in two hands. So one of the reasons I've been really pushing to get this to work, and it might be coming sooner than we thought. So if you've been waiting anxiously, either get a NEODiMOUNT or to use your iPhone with one of the cases that Occipital had in their contest, that should be coming very soon. All right, so one other thing I wanted to show you, and is the prototype of the new iPod Touch, which is this unit here. As you saw in the earlier version, there we go, I have changed the positioning because since the iPod Touch is smaller, I had a version that had it next to it, but it had to extend out. So I have recalibrated it for the middle of the device, and it actually works just as well. And so it actually seems to have a little bit more balance. Now the positive, and I'll go ahead and close out the iPhone. The negative behind the iPod, and really there is only one, is its screen. It is only like 7% slower, and really you don't notice that. But it's a 4.7-inch screen versus what, a 5.1 or 2-inch screen on the 6, and then obviously a 5.5 on the 6 Plus. But I actually don't see that as a huge deficit because one of the things I did is, if you noticed, I've tried to minimize the size of the UI so that you have a lot of surface. So I will jump back to it. Obviously, you'll see that it's very close to the same specifications as the others, so you probably don't see a difference. I also, because they're using a 4x3 area for the actual imaging area, I'm taking advantage of that black area to put my vertical cube placement as well as the scan button, and then slim down all the controls around the edges so that you have an area in the middle. Again, it is a 4.7-inch device, so it is smaller, but it's lighter, so that's a positive, and has about all the same horsepower, which I'll show you here in a second. Again, I don't have the lens involved, so I will go ahead and scan. Whoops, sorry. Let me jump. Yeah, see, I didn't. So let's go to 2.2, 2.4 is good. Use all the other settings, HQ color, lock in the focus. Let's get closer. Okay. Notice that the mesh development is very close to the iPhone 6. Okay, so there we go. And then I will apply color to it. Since the mesh is, so you'll see here that it's applying texture as quickly in HQ mode as the iPhone. So if you're looking, let's say if you're an Android person like myself, can't afford to get two phones or the $800, I think the iPod Touch 6G is an excellent alternative. Again, some weirdness in the mesh, but I think that it's easily an alternative. I'm still working on the case design, so that will be coming in probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But again, if you don't have an iPhone 6 or 6 Plus, the iPod Touch is an excellent alternative. It has pretty much all the horsepower other than a smaller screen. But if you've got the iPad Air 2 or you're waiting to get one of the more robust or more powerful iPads coming out in the next, what's going to be October or November timeframe, rumors are it's going to have an A9 processor and be 50 to even 100% faster than the current version. So that might be something to look at. And obviously they're going to have the 6S and 6S Plus available too. So again, thank you everyone for who's tuning in to see this. This will be available on YouTube. I apologize if I ranted a little bit. I'm kind of talking to myself. I don't have anybody that I'm working with, so hopefully I've covered all the questions you may have. Email me if you have further questions, and I'll try to respond to them and maybe put together another little tutorial for you, and we'll go from there. So again, thank you. Bye.